right, hello everyone. You can take a seat. Welcome to, what are we calling this panel? Can you teach an old college new tricks? Which I guess puts the college in the, unfortunately puts the college in the position of the dog in that play on words, but that's man's best friend, so it works. I'm Reeve Hamilton. I'm from the Texas Tribune. I'm joined by Juliet García, the president of the University of Texas at Brownsville, Stephen Mintz, the executive director of the Institute for Transformational Learning at the University of Texas System, and Felice Nudelman, the chancellor of Antioch University. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
I think I'll start with Dr. Garcia. For those of you who haven't been following the story of the University of Texas at Brownsville, it's been in this interesting position of, it's been a part of this partnership for a long time with the community college and had a very unique setup for a 20th century university. And as that has ceased to exist, they've been put in this sort of unique opportunity to reinvent themselves. And I know that they've been looking a lot at how to refashion a sort of 21st century university for the Rio Grande Valley. And of course, there's an initiative to create a new university by combining with UT Pan American and a medical school down there. But sort of even separate from that, UT Brownsville's been in this cool position. And I know that Dr. Garcia, you've been having conversations with people from around the country in higher education about what that sort of university should look like or could look like. I was wondering, what are some of the things that you've gleaned from sort of your investigations?
Well, thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to be here today and with my colleagues. What I've gleaned is how confused people are and how there is no one pathway. I was reading something that our colleague had written, and she called it a renaissance. And I think that's a really good way of thinking about it, because folks right now are thinking about disruption, and it is a disruption, but so was the Renaissance. And that was not a bad thing, it was a good thing. So, so it is a confusing time with everything on the table. Doesn't seem to be anything that can't get put in to the discussion about how should we do this in the future. All of us understand, whether you're in private education or in public education, whether you're in K through 12, private schools, everybody's looking at the business model, because the business model that we all have is wobbly. It just won't work if we need to scale up the business to a larger number of folks and be successful with them. And so the old revenue streams aren't going to work for us. And so how do we do this differently and more effectively? So we've convened groups locally, from students to parents to faculty to students on our campus, off our campus. We've convened a national group together to think about it as well. And you come back still confused because no one really has a pathway. So what we know that we're settling closer to what actually Stephen has helped us think about more specifically, and that is a technology, not a technology solution, but a solution that melds and weaves the use of technology in a high-touch model with students. Our students need extra mentoring. Our students are first generation, 92% Hispanic students, almost all first generation, 69% on Pell Grants. And so often the most at-risk students by the traditional measures. But they can also succeed and succeed in ways that you know that we've talked about before. Chess, for example. They can play nationally and win nationally in chess. Well, if they can do chess, they can do math and physics and everything else. So why aren't they? Why? And so what we're trying to figure out is how to rethink our processes for teaching and learning and take advantage of this kind of moment of metamorphosis for us to rethink everything from the business model, the physical model of campus, and then the use of human capital on campus to discern more creative ways to do this.
Well, Dr. Mintz, obviously as the executive director of the Institute for Transformational Learning, I think when a lot of people hear transformational learning, they think that might be a sort of a fancy way of saying moving things online. Is there more to it than that?
Partly it is about moving things online. We need to I think, radically rethink what online education looks like. Right now, it looks like old-fashioned correspondence courses. You have streaming audio, streaming video, and PowerPoint slides. And if that's our vision of online education, I'd say, take it, right? My vision of online education is quite different than that. It involves, first of all, much more self-conscious, scientifically informed course design, where you focus on learning objectives and you align your assessments really closely with that. Second of all, it involves personalized adaptive learning. That is, tools that diagnose students' learning deficiencies and then address them so that we can customize education. Third, it involves social networking and active learning and interaction, simulations, animations, virtual reality environments, and the like. And fourth, it involves data analytics. So we know at every moment in a course how students are doing. When I advocate online education, I'm not advocating it instead of small seminars where 7 students sit around a table with a full professor. I'm talking about courses like the ones I've taught. 592 students, no breakout sessions, a totally impersonal relationship between the faculty member and the students, and a failure rate of over 30%. That's what I want to replace. We can't live any longer with that level of failure. And then this kind of online education will allow us, in turn, to do more of the high-touch, high-impact practices that we know really work, like freshman research experiences, freshman seminars, internships, co-op experiences, and the like.
Well, Dr. Nudelman, obviously you've, as a student and you've compiled curriculums on American civics and government. Is there a reason that our institutions have been set up the way that they have been and have operated sort of the same way for centuries that sort of this stuff doesn't address?
Well, so we've been following a model and a calendar from the 11th century, right? And so it worked up to a point. And I think that one of the interesting things when you talk about a Renaissance and when you talk about the notion of what does it mean as we progress and grow and change, the real challenge is how do we stay true to our core? And you can have models that we've held to since the 11th century and say, well, it's time to change some of the methods of delivery. It's time to change some of the ways that we look at cognitive brain development, or how students learn, how students create knowledge and meaning based on the latest research about cognitive brain development, about retention, about completion rates, about the needs in the country and globally for economic and social capital. But one of the core challenges then is how do we stay true to our core? So if the supposition is that our core is the creation of knowledge and meaning, but the way that we do that and the way that we interact with students, we can blue sky. We can use current data. We can use those data to actually affect change. We can look at how people work in peer groups. And that's changed. I mean, I think that you can innovate on legacies in a way that becomes very exciting, becomes energizing for students and for faculty. I think the danger is if you don't know what your core proposition is, it won't matter what you do or what you layer on top of. So I would say that lecture hall, of which many of us have attended as students, and it was mind-numbing, that didn't meet the core either. That if the goal is helping these individuals create knowledge and meaning, that was as much of a failure as the online correspondence model. And when we talk about Renaissance, one of the exciting things for me, both when I was at the New York Times and at Antioch University, is the understanding of what it means to innovate on a legacy and what it means to meet students where they are right now and also meet students where they are right now, but understand if you can see a little bit around the corners, what the economic and social capital needs of the country are, and try to bring those two together in alignment. So.
Well, and how quick should the approach be? Should we, sort of one online course at a time, or should we just go whole hog into it? Obviously, Dr. Mintz, you are doing a lot with MOOCs, right? You were just talking to folks at edX, and obviously one of the big stories from last month was the sort of disintegration of that MOOC at Georgia Tech, which was on how to teach a good online degree. So, I mean, what are the chances that as we try to innovate, if we go too quickly, things will fall apart?
There's 3 audiences for higher ed. Okay, one audience, one market, we're serving really well. These are students at residential colleges who graduate at really high rates. We have a second market, a group that we're not reaching at all. This is a totally unserved market. That's about 50% of kids, right? It's a huge market. And then there's a third market, which is kids who are attending pretty traditional colleges, and they're failing out and they're not getting a degree. At UT Austin, which has students from the top 7% of every high school in this state, 20 to 25% of the students will fail out by the end of their second year. 50% of all students at UT Austin will fail at least one science course. This is unbelievable, right? We can do better. We don't need to change the way students are learning at Harvard and Yale. It seems to work fine. But that's a teeny percentage of the market for higher ed. It's this other set of people, the unserved and the not well-served, that we've got to figure out what to do.
So I think there's another market as well, which is the adult learner.
Yeah.
And I think on top of that, there's a global market that is a mix and is no longer siloed by age, gender, culture, or any demographics. And so I think that the interesting thing about MOOCs that we saw, and why we negotiated the contract with Coursera to actually offer credit for MOOCs, was this diversity of a learner pool and what it would mean in terms of how you engage with students and the potential for this type of access and affordability. But I think there's another opportunity when we look at responsiveness, and you talked about how quick or how responsive. I don't know that it's an all or nothing proposition, but I do think responsiveness is important. And if I could, I'd like to give an example from when I was at the New York Times. So I get a phone call one morning. I'm in my office, and it's the UN, and they have a problem. They've gotten a phone call from a group of journalists in Egypt and a group of journalists in Tunisia, and the call went something like, the fax machines are not working. Well, it wasn't the fax machines weren't working. It was that the government was not sending stories to the journalists for them to put in the paper the next day. And so the fax machines were not working. But that meant that the journalists had to learn how to cover the revolution that was going on outside their door. And yet, they didn't come from journalism schools, and they weren't taught investigative reporting, and there wasn't the Freedom of Information Act, and so they called the UN. What do? We get a phone call, and we were asked, can you build a 6-week course? Can you do it in 3 weeks? Can you do it in English and Arabic? And can you have streaming video, and can it be taught by New York Times newsroom and other faculty? And can you teach and work with journalists in Egypt and Tunisia on how to cover a revolution? And what do you do? Now that's education. So I had a response, and I went to the newsroom and said, can we do it? And actually the instructional designer that built it is sitting there in the audience. I said, can you do it? And they said, yeah, we're on board. But I said, here's a caveat. What I'd like to do is also offer it to students from US institutions. And we worked with ASCU, the American Association of State Colleges and Universities, and offered it to students. journalism students for a front row seat to be there side by side with journalists in Egypt and Tunisia to look at how to cover a revolution and how to cover a burgeoning democracy. So you can break down the walls. Now, we did it in English, and we did 24/7 within a 2-hour period of translation into Arabic. By the 3rd week of the forum discussions, we hit 40,000 words in discussion. It was that vibrant. And it was the opportunity to be responsive, to use technology in a way that is high touch, highly engaging, had all the different components from video streaming to forum discussions to content distribution, traditional content, but to engage globally around a current issue. And that's something that when you follow a model from the 11th century, it's hard to turn on a dime like that. It's something, though, that if we could do it as a group of educators, I think it would open up doors and break down silos in a way that would change the conversation.
And let me speak to that if I could for just a second. When you said UT Brownsville and thinking about the Rio Grande Valley, we've never seen ourselves as at the tail end of the state of Texas or on the southernmost tip of the United States as a limiting factor. We've always seen ourselves as the portal to Central and South America. So it's always interesting to me to have folks, because if you look at the USA Today world map, I'm not picking on them, but their map often looks like if you go to Brownsville, Texas, and you take one more step, you fall into a cavern and you're never to be seen from again. And of course, we know that there's a lot going on south of us, and that's also, in an interesting kind of way, that the global South looks more like the Rio Grande Valley than does the origins of the higher ed system, that were not necessarily in the global South. And so what's interesting to me about your example is there was a recent TED Talk by someone, and I'm sorry I forget his name, but was talking about the use of incubators, baby incubators to lower infant mortality rate. I think it was in India. And they would give them a very expensive incubator. Within 2 years, it was sitting in a corner not being used because it had broken and they couldn't get replacement parts for it. So the task was to discover how to get incubators of the kind that would survive in the global South. Because like India, that would be a solution for South Africa, for Mexico, for Brazil, from Peru, other places. So they found that the one thing that still always worked in these places were cars. Cars, old cars. People kind of found a way to fix them. So they decided to invent an incubator for babies that was made of car parts. And they did. So the reason I mention that is because it's a relevant learning experience. It's also relevant to an important issue in your region. And so if you think about the Rio Grande Valley, you also need to think about what we represent in the global South. And that those are the kinds of folks that need solutions for regional issues that are good examples for thinking processes. And so for us to have built a core curriculum that looks just like the one in Minnesota or just like the one in Austin doesn't somehow seem authentic, not only to who we are there, but to what our mission is. So going back to the notion of just what is your mission and who is your market? I think anyone who's talked to Sal Khan knows that when you say, "You intending this for who?" he says, "The planet." And then he begins to describe how when he's in the process of translating all of his work into languages, the most used languages in the United States. So what if we could take the core mission of a university and with this renaissance of thought, rethink, how could I accelerate time to graduation? Not by cheapening the degree, not just by block scheduling, I mean, those are interesting, not just by hiring more adjuncts. Those have been our solutions in the past. Do it cheaper. But what if we could do it better? And I think what we're hearing here is that there are ways now with the use of technology we could not have imagined in the days of lectures. So Do you still need faculty? Let me get to that point, because faculty, get nervous, and so do I, and so does everyone in the traditional higher ed market. Absolutely you do, but not to do the things that we're putting them to do right now. So their jobs are going to change significantly, but to do the kinds of things they want to do right now. They want to have the smaller classes, or they want to have the experiential learning, or the case study, or those projects that are regionally based, and they can have more relationship with a student. They don't want to lecture to 529 students. They know it doesn't work, and they will admit that to you. So I think we are, while we don't have the answers, what is, I think, the most important thing is that nobody's job will look the same. If you start out with it that candidly, you may become a mentor, a tutor. One more example, integrated tutoring. We know that integrated tutoring in classes works. That is, if I keep you in class for 1 extra hour with a tutor, that you are going to have a much better chance of completing that course by 27 to 40-some%. And this is everything from organic chemistry to English to history. But I can't scale that up right now. But what if I could through one of these technologies? So it's a mix. When you say, what are the answers? It's still a mix, and it may work out differently for one school as it does for another. But I think one of the things that we've settled on is it's going to be uncomfortable for a while, because none of us do have the answer, and that's not a bad thing.
But a will to do that is one thing. When you're in a university that's been around, Antioch has been around for a long time. UT Brownsville has been around for a long time. There are reporting structures, there are policies. Bringing in new technology, of course, costs money. I mean, how quickly can you really turn a big institution around?
Very quickly, and it depends on what you're facing. If you have a choice, and you can hunker down, and we'll go back to the news industry in a second and ask how quickly can you turn around. But you can hunker down and say, we're going to take a last man standing approach. And we're going to hope that by hunkering down, we're going to hold on, and we're going to make it. That doesn't work so well. It really doesn't work so well. And the institutions that say that we're going to base our survival on hunkering down I don't have much hope for that. Now, I don't know that you need to blow it up, right? But I do think you can take certain things and you can identify some of the biggest challenges, and in fairly short order, start addressing them. You don't have to always throw money at something. So if the issue is that your completion rates have bottomed out, enrollment's declining, you're not meeting the students or having students that are graduating that are able to succeed, well, those things you can start addressing. For us, Antioch, it's been around more than 150 years. We didn't have an online, a virtual program. Within the first 2 months of starting, from when I started in July, we had established a relationship with Coursera and are able to offer college credit for MOOCs, university credit for MOOCs. We're doing that with high school students. We have pilots with high school students, and we have pilots through our baccalaureate completion program. So a blended type of approach. You can take a traditional Antioch University course, or you can take MOOCs, and we're going to work with you on the evaluation of those and granting of credit. You can do some things fairly quickly. Once you have a few successes, the faculty and others begin seeing new levels of ways they can engage with students. And faculty are the most student-centered people you'll ever want to meet. And they know if there's a gap there, and they typically want to do better. Now you also face significant entrenchment, and you can face labor issues and all sorts of things. But I don't know that moving fast doesn't mean blowing up the system and recreating it. But I don't think we have the luxury of time.
Dr. Garcia, do you agree that things can be turned around pretty quickly?
I think sometimes you need a little incentive, a catastrophe, something that allows you to use it as a catalyst to provide a reason for change. We've had several of those kinds of things, but if you look at because of our separation, we have to rethink our campus. I mean, from the beginning of what are our classrooms, who owns what buildings will you have in the future, and that causes you to rethink. Well, if I could only have 5 buildings, what would they look like, and how would I use them differently, and how would I reorganize myself? So we're using this moment of separation from the model that we were in to say, great time to rethink, redo. Now, lest it sound too romantic, like it's all gonna, like everybody's getting on the bandwagon. A friend of mine many years ago gave me very, very good advice, and we were starting another experiment. He said, 1/3 of the people will agree with you immediately, get on and be enthusiastic just like you are. Another 1/3 will take a while. They'll get there, but it may be 3 years. And then another 1/3 decide to leave and never get on with it. So I think we have to kind of think about that reality straight out and understand that may happen. Now, we may be doing this at just the right time, because for faculty in the United States, we have many faculty who are of retirement age, who have put in their time, and who may grouse and leave and say, and I don't want this anymore because it's changed too much. I had a faculty member kind of send an indirect message to me the other day saying, could we just go back to normal?
Yeah.
And I thought, how sad, because we'll never go back. But what was normal? And I know exactly what they meant, but if that's what would satisfy you, then we won't do that. But let me give you another example. One of the things that we've started was a Math and Science Academy for 11th and 12th graders. Every student that we've started, we bring them on campus. They start out at our university as 11th graders in high school. So they're 16 years old, 17 years old. Every one of those students has graduated from college. Now they're all over the United States and elsewhere studying professional degrees, master's degrees. But we can only do that with 140 students a year. So sometimes it's just taking a program that works really well and trying to understand if you can scale that up using technologies that we weren't using before, or in a way that we weren't using. So imagine if we could have that kind of academy in lots of different places, all feeding into our junior level courses. What if my freshman class wasn't on campus, right? What if my freshman class was in a high school somewhere and they were taking other kinds of Coursera courses or edX courses or something else? What if we said we're going to accept students at their traditional sophomore year, when you've reached these competencies? How many kids would reach that goal? I think that like those 140 or so that we deal with every year, there's probably thousands. If chess is indication, right, of the potential of kids in our community, and there are thousands playing chess and winning national tournaments, then why aren't they doing that again in math and science? If they can learn chess at 5.5, why are we waiting to teach them algebra and worried about it in 8th and 9th grade? So I think what we're learning is that we really do need to turn it upside down. We really do need to rethink how we use our faculties, how we use ourselves, because the other thing is it's not just faculty's jobs that will change. Advisors are not going to have one-on-ones with students in the way that they might have normally. There's so many online advising tools now that you can do that work differently. So I think everybody's job on a campus is going to change.
Well, and also, what about, it's not just sort of those things. It's also, there are all these metrics and assessment measurements that have been created over the years. So if you have all these different students going through all these different pathways at different speeds, how do you keep track of everyone? And do you lose some cohesiveness, or is that just, is the technology maybe making it easier? I mean, Dr. Mintz, do you have thoughts on that?
Postmodernism isn't just a philosophy, right? It's a reality of our lives. Students are consuming education very differently than the way their parents did. Right now, a lot of students are co-enrolled at community colleges and four-year colleges. They're taking online classes and face-to-face classes. And pretty soon, they're going to be taking things in even more formats. Pretty soon, we're going to have competency-based modules that you then take a test for and get credit for. Pretty soon you're going to be taking accelerated courses that don't fit a 15-week or 8-week calendar. And of course, we're going to have to figure out how to evaluate that, how to provide credentialing for those students. And I don't think, though, that that's very far away. I think we're going to see this within 5 years. So we're not talking about the distant future. We're not talking about fusion power here, which is always 50 years in the future. We're talking about a future that we can basically see. There's a lot of policy barriers to this right now because universities only get rewarded for seat time. There are other kind of impediments, but what strikes me is the sense that things have to change. Part of it is financial. Since 1979, tuition rose in the United States 7% a year every year, 3 or 4% more than inflation. It can't rise anymore. Family and student debt rose to levels that they can't rise anymore. State appropriations have stagnated or fallen. It's not going to turn around. Federal grants are going to stagnate. It doesn't matter who you vote for. That's just going to be a fact of life. But worse than those financial problems is an ideological problem. 80% of the public believes that higher ed is not a good value for the money. And you and I can scream all we want and show you the difference in income, and people don't believe it. Companies are convinced that our graduates don't have the skills that they want, and at the same time as that, graduation rates are too low. So we've got to change, and we've got to change quickly. And my sense is that in the last couple of years, faculty have come to believe, for better or worse, things have to change, and better for faculty to be at the leadership role than to just be passive spectators.
Well, I was going to ask you about, since you're doing MOOCs for credit now, if it's not just sort of faculty, it's people outside the colleges too, sort of the older generation. I've been on panels where people have said this, they think online, they think massive, and they think that the word rigor has been completely dropped out of the conversation. And how do you convince them otherwise?
Yeah.
Obviously you have confidence in it if you're giving credit for it.
Yeah, so I've been taking, I think I'm on my 5th MOOC. And anyone who thinks there's not rigor in online, whether it's a MOOC or otherwise, if it's good, right? I mean, there are really poorly constructed MOOCs out there, and there are some really phenomenal MOOCs out there. There are some really poorly constructed online, as you know, and there's some phenomenally engaging online. There are lectures that are terrible, right? And there are some that just blow your mind. So I don't know that it's the delivery mechanism.
Is that any different from
I
an
think it's
in-person
the
lecture?
yeah, I think it's the standard. I think if you're holding to certain standards and you're holding to the core proposition and you have the rigor, that's going to make the difference. Now, on top of that, though, and I agree with Dr. Mintz, even if you have the high standards, but your faculty or your curriculum designers or instructional designers don't have a clue in terms of how people really learn, it won't work. And so really high standards for a correspondence course aren't cutting it anymore. And I think the ability, the part of the big game changer as well is that students have found ways to navigate sources of information on their own. And they no longer, the biggest shift that's driving, that I think that is driving faculty, other than the declining enrollments, the loss of FTEs, and their own financial troubles at the institution, are that students no longer perceive them to be the sage on the stage. And so it's sort of forcing that organic bubbling up, is sort of forcing the question.
Let me speak to one point that I think that needs to be differentiated a bit. If you think about online, as you described earlier, as simply one person looking at you and talking to you, or a PowerPoint those are the earliest versions of online education. Carnegie Mellon, with the Open Learning Initiative, has a sophisticated feedback loop for faculty that are teaching online. So if you are taking my class and I make an assignment, I know whether you've read it, and I know how much competency you have in each of the modules in my class, and then I can adjust. I can do that for you and everyone else in my class. So when I go to class on Monday morning, I know what you all did that weekend, and I know where I should spend my time. So if I say this is the only section of that class that I was going to teach that really anybody got stuck in, that's where I'll go. I won't spend my whole time. And it's a constant evolving class so that it's refined as you go through the semester. So these are not, and the con courses, the solid con courses, are doing a very similar kind of things. And if you're a parent, you can get online and find out where your student, your child is and how they're doing and help them. And then they find tutoring online, of course, that will help supplant the work that they're doing. So this is a very sophisticated, now take the student who's in a lecture class, in Stephen's big class that he talked about a moment ago. He has no idea whether they're on Facebook, or they're asleep, or if they're daydreaming, or if they're listening, or they're enthused, I'm sure, about and inspired by the lecturer. But no feedback loop except maybe once a semester, twice, or on exams. So this is a better situation. It's not replacing something that worked really fantastically. This is actually a new and improved version of what we have.
The key, I think, to rethinking education for the 21st century is to view students as creators of knowledge as opposed to consumers of knowledge. So what does that mean? Instead of the old industrial model of transmission of common content to students, we want those students to be active creators. And so if I teach a history class, I want students to create online museum exhibitions. I want them to conduct virtual tours. I want them to create public websites. I want them to create video. They can do it, you can do it, right? Why wouldn't we want to empower students? So it's not about providing a cheaper education or a more efficient education. I think it's fundamentally about rethinking what education is and moving away from the transmission model, which is so synonymous with education, to what I'll call a German model. The Germans have a different word for education, Bildung. And Bildung means construction of self, right? It's very different than our notion of education, which is just learning in its narrowest sense. We want to tap students' creativity. And I think with the cyber learners of the 21st century, this is the only way to go.
Does that put too much power, or are you assuming too many capabilities on the part of the student?
I'm willing to take a chance. I've seen it at elite institutions. I used to teach at Columbia University. I've seen it at more commuter institutions like the University of Houston, where I also taught. Students have tremendous capabilities if we tap them.
I watched a group of students get online and play this game. And it opens with a dark screen. And you move the mouse around and things start happening, like all of a sudden an eye pops open, or this happens, or that happens, or this happens. And they feel their way around till they find the solution, because the goal is to get to the next screen. There's no rules. There's no order that you have to, hierarchical order, linear order. But within about, I'd say 7 minutes, they get it. They find it, they figure out what you have to do to get to the next level, right? And it's okay for them. They're okay with that. And they're okay with talking about, well, did this work, or this, and moving on. So I did an experiment, and I showed it to a group. I was doing a talk, and I showed it to a group of adults and educators. And I said, all right, what do we do with this screen? What do we do? We're in this environment. What do we do? And they kept asking, well, where are the rules? Where are the rules? You know, what do I do first? What do I do second? And finally, you know, as they started feeling their way around, at first it was really disconcerting. It was really disconcerting. It was really disconcerting to realize that it wasn't so linear anymore. It wasn't so hierarchical anymore. And that you had to invent new ways of approaching this environment. When they realize that these young kids that will be coming to them in a few years felt totally comfortable, could take on, felt empowered by doing this, it showed this gap of how we construct the knowledge and the experience.
I think he meant to turn me off.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Well, I think we are going to follow very strict rules when it comes to Q&A and form a very linear line here in the middle. So we're going to transition to that now. If you have a question, come line up here and we'll get going. If you don't, I'll just throw some more.
I have a question for Dr. Mintz. The Institute for Transformational Learning at UT, I know that you're going to offer through edX, I think 5 classes this year through the
Right.
MOOCs. What does success look like for you, like 3 years down the road as a part of this partnership with edX?
People are involved in the MOOCs for a lot of different reasons. You know, one reason for a lot of universities is global branding, right? They, you know, if you're Harvard or MIT and you have plenty of resources, one way to expend your resources is to improve your global brand, right? So that everyone around the world knows that you're, quote unquote, the best. But there's other motives for being involved in this. One's a social justice motive, right? To spread expertise around the entire world. Another reason is to experiment with pedagogy in the online sphere and see what we can learn from student learning. After all, when you have 150,000 kids in a class, you can really use the learning analytics in a way that was impossible before. Many of the MOOCs are, of course, aimed at really talented, incredibly motivated students around the world, many of whom already have bachelor's degrees. But I'm less interested in that. I'm interested in our students. I'm interested in our state. And I want to spread the campus's riches across the entire system. And there's particular areas I'm especially interested in. For example, in training medical personnel. So I think we can leverage this tool that we have and use it in really creative ways. For example, there is almost unlimited demand for English as a second language around the world. How wonderful to be able to spread that knowledge for free or close to it, right? High quality. It seems to me public universities have a responsibility to serve the public. I just define the public broader than just a small, narrow group of American citizens.
Okay, thank you.
Next question.
Hi. My question is around what is out there now. Coursera looks to be sort of the most dominant MOOC platform today, at least by number of users, but they typically offer their classes asynchronously, and synchronously. So you can't take it, you know, at any time. You have to be there at the specific time. I know just from my own experience, you know, I was taking a course. I was actually taking one of the courses that ACE is offering credit for, or offering a recommendation for credit. And I got behind, I missed the midterm, so now that course is basically useless to me. And so how are you working with the MOOC platforms today? How do you foresee, are you going to create your own content? Maybe Dr. Mintz, you can talk to that. How do you see that working?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, suspend, this works. We'll split it. So our model is that one of the things that we have at Antioch University, along with our mission of social justice, which is why we're interested in this, is we have extremely high completion rates and we have extremely low student default rates. And that's what made us an interesting partner. And there's a reason. We are based on experiential learning, and we have been for more than 150 years. So what we did with Coursera was agree with them that they would build certain specific sections where our faculty would join as faculty of record and actually help with student engagement, help with student self-reflection. We're based on narrative, not grades. And so help with that process of how do you take what you're learning and create knowledge and meaning, and do it in a way that also allowed, and I do think it's a downfall with Coursera that it's all synchronous, and it makes it very hard if you fall back. But by building in these cohort learner models with faculty mentorship, so faculty is mentor coach, not as the subject expert, it's actually helped with student engagement, helped with student completion. I think if you take the Coursera, what I'm interested in is how you build both a hybrid, and I would say hybrid in the future is both as synchronous and asynchronous, but how do you take sort of that blended method of delivery? So if synchronous, if people want synchronous, but you also have to build really compelling asynchronous that allows for a community cohort learning style as well.
We built an educational system around students who are 18 to 22 on a residential campus. And they now constitute less than 20% of all students. Are we surprised the system doesn't work so well? Even at UT Austin, pretty privileged place, 3/4 of the students are working 25 hours a week or more, right? They're non-traditional students, even if they look like traditional students. So what I advocate is choice and options, so that people will be able to consume education in ways that meet their needs. And what this is going to push us towards, for better or worse, is some kind of competency-based assessment, so that more education will be self-paced, but the goals, the rubrics will be clear. And when you can meet those hurdles, you're going to get credit. And when you don't meet those hurdles, it doesn't matter how much you sat in class.
This is just a real quick follow-up, but do you see an opportunity for a Coursera-type platform that would be more like Khan Academy, where you've got persistent videos there for content?
Oh, I think it's definitely going to move in the direction of consumption on demand, much more towards that. What is also going to occur is unbundling. Often you're not going to need a whole course. You're going to need a portion of a course. Let me just give you a kind of funny example. I met the head of global training for ExxonMobil. He has 80,000 seats at Harvard Business School, online seats, right? His people spread across the globe need just-in-time learning on particular subjects. And Harvard Business School, nominally a nonprofit, has figured out how to profit enormously for this need, right? People want expertise on a subject. They have a place to go. ExxonMobil's paying. So, I mean, we're going to see models, I think, much more like that in the future.
Yeah, I think where we are with MOOCs, we won't be there for much longer. We're playing around with ebook strategies of how do you unbundle courses and create ebook chapters that can be produced, and sold for 99 cents. So once you start pulling apart these things, MOOCs may be, one iteration, and it's just the beginning of what they're going to be. Maybe they'll end up as a licensing model. Maybe they'll end up as a, asynchronous. But I don't know where they'll end up, but they're not going to stay exactly where they are right now.
Hi, I want to come back to the point of retention on the college level. Half the kids who are starting at four-year college are not finishing at that college in 6 years, let alone 4 years. Can the panelists tick off some of the reasons why and how technology might help drive up those retention numbers?
The biggest factor for non-graduation, I mean, this is the most disturbing part, is non-cognitive. And that makes it a lot harder to deal with because we know how to deal with the cognitive issues. Part of it's social and social dynamics. Students who drop out often isolate themselves or they feel marginalized at the institution that they are. And this builds on itself. It creates a culture of failure and it leads to disaster. So one thing we have to figure out how to do in a technological enhanced environment is to connect students. It's not like it's working so great in a face-to-face environment. So it's not like we're moving from something that's perfect to something that's awful. You know, for those students who are going to fail, the face-to-face environment's not working so well. So we've got to figure out what to do. Now, we can create groups. That's one possibility. We can monitor student behavior, which is a little dicey, but you know, can keep us attuned to who's at risk in our classes. We're going to have to try all of this. You know, if the problems were simply lack of preparation, I know how to deal with that. I mean, that's reasonably simple and straightforward. But the problems tend to be otherwise.
I mean,
Dr. Garcia, could you weigh in on that?
I think it also is going to require us to take responsibility for the student, for the whole student. When we talk about social justice, that's a real concept. That doesn't mean, remember when well, some of you were too young, but when I was in school, it was the wonderful remark that you got from graduate professors was, look to your right, look to your left, half of you will not be here by the end of this semester. And what that was assumed. That was actually a part of the trademark, was that if you survived, you know, one semester, the school was a better school. That's not socially responsible, is it? And so one of the things that we don't do well right now is if someone says, I didn't come to class, my child was ill. I didn't come to class because I didn't have transportation because I had one car and my mother needed the car and she couldn't, you know, whatever it is. And we just say, well, try to make it next time or try to make it up. But what if we took responsibility for that? What if we decided we were going to help the whole student? So I don't mean you can help everybody all the time, but you can have categories of help. So schools started child care centers for single moms and single dads on campus. Schools started certain kinds of dormitories and residences for those kinds of students. Students started tutoring for students who were online. So there's lots of things that we can do much better, even for the traditional student. So I think there needs to be a strategy. We know what works. I mean, you can look at the successful student model. Kid comes to us college prepared, straight out of high school, doesn't stop out one semester, takes only full-time classes, maintains at least a 2.5 GPA, and doesn't stop one semester, makes it to graduation. Highest probability of success, lowest probability of failure. But if I'm one of those students, and I'm low socioeconomic, and Stephen is high socioeconomic, and we did everything exactly alike, he has 4 times the chance of graduating as compared to me, just because of all that life intervenes. So I think we have to take more of that life intervention as part of our own responsibility at university.
Thank you.
You do raise a question, though, I'd like us to ponder a little bit. College degrees are about signaling, right? And the reason you want to go to Harvard is not that you're going to get a better education. You know, the most popular courses at Harvard have 900 students in them, and they don't have an auditorium big enough for 900 students. So you're just watching a screen with Michael Sandel or whoever. You know, it's not so great, but right, the signaling of a Harvard degree means a ton. And it's completely unfair and it's completely arbitrary. As Juliet suggested, right, you have just a huge advantage if you're in a higher socioeconomic status. In the Ivy League, 6%, that's this, come from families with the bottom half of the income distribution. So 50% of the population produces 6% of Ivy League students. It's not a meritocracy, right? So one thing we've got to figure out is how to credential people in ways that those credentials really count. And they're not viewed as second tier or second rate. And that's going to be one of, if we want a truly democratic society, competency should be what we're measuring, not simply privilege in various ways. This is a real challenge. Those signaling developed for a long time. It's going to be hard to change.
And I'm heartened by the latest work of the DOE with Lumina, Joyce, and Kresge to identify some institutions as pilot institutions that can really look at competency-based models versus seat time. That's a pretty bold move. The challenge will be, will the accreditors, regardless of the information that comes out from that pilot, will they be willing to change, to look at accreditation not as seat time but as competency-based? Because it does, if that goes forward over the next couple of years, that could be one of the most radical changes to our system.
They have to. And so how does that easy to think about them doing? The one thing that we get measured on by the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools, regardless of whether you're a private or a nonprofit or public, is instructional effectiveness. Now, unfortunately, and learning objectives, right, that drive that. That's exactly what modular-based and competency-based programs would do. They would show you whether or not the instruction was effective and you learned. So we have to change things that are underneath it. But I think their very core is the same. They just have to think harder. Now, I will tell you one thing. I was thrilled when I walked in to this place today because I was just at a university president's meeting in Washington, and everyone looks my age or older. And they're so white-haired. And I walked in here and I thought, maybe I'm at the wrong meeting, because I'm so accustomed to being at meetings where folks are much older. So part of it is just a whole new think that we need to apply to our work. When you have a problem in our office and I'm stuck on my computer, I get one of the work study students and get her to come in and tell me how to do what I do. And then I say, now how did you do it? Teach me. And she goes, just call me next time, right? Because it's easier than her to teach me. And so that is, there's a real difference. The final thing there is this notion of how the brain is developing. I mean, the research is very clear now in terms of how the synapses is increasing for children, brain synapses, when you are a digital child. Our students are all they're called digital natives. We are non-natives. We learned it later on. But our students coming to us are digital natives. So to apply how we learn to what they're doing is so we really have to. So it has to happen.
Well, I think we're about out of time. Is that all right?
Yep.
President Garcia, Dr. Mintz, Chancellor Nudelman, thank you for coming, spending your time with us.
Thank you, everyone.